Everybody, welcome to Life Cycles Live. I am blessed to have the wonderful Michelle Henley with me today. Thank you for joining me, Michelle.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to chat.
Yeah, and you're down in the Houston, Texas area, and I'm in Eastern Virginia, and our weather's probably somewhat similar, except you've got all the heat, right?
It's brutal.
This time of year down there gets kind of wild, right? Because I think a lot of people think Texas, they think like dry heat, but that area of the Gulf is like super humid, right? Like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, we've got, 97 degrees, 97% humidity. It's lovely. Come on down.
yeah,
Winter here is fantastic.
yes,
July, August, into September, not so much. October will be nice. So,
yeah. October is going to be beautiful, and I've never made it to Houston, which is just like a catastrophe. But I think I've been to. This is going to be so weird. I've been to like Dallas, and I've been to very far west, or like New Mexico, Texas border for government work, out there in the desert. And I just love that drive across the very western part of the state because it's like almost like being on the ocean. I spent all those years at sea, and there's nothing. And then the only other place I've ever experienced that is driving between western Texas and eastern New Mexico, and there's nothing, which is
it's funny you say that because Texas is such a big state, and I was born and raised in Texas. I've lived a couple other places, but most of my time's been here. And you see all the old westerns with the tumbleweeds and all that kind of stuff. And I was on the coast in Victoria and or near the coast, and then here in Houston, I'm like, that's ridiculous. That's not Texas. That's just some Hollywood interpretation. And then I went to West Texas. I'm like, oh, this is what they're talking about.
it's so true. It is right out of a movie. I mean, I think it was Almagorda. Uh, I was at the airport, and the guy handed me the key to the rental car, and I said, "So do we go out in the lot and like we walk around and you?" He's like, "No, man, you're good to go." I was like, "That's it?" He's like, "That's it." And so I get in the car, and I realized he didn't hand me like this 9 mile long receipt that you usually get at every other airport in the world. And I'm like, how am I going to like go through the checkout to take the car out? There's no one there to check you out. They don't care. Just take the car, come back when you're supposed to, kind of thing. It was awesome. Um,
We actually did some work. It's probably 22, 23 years ago, a long time ago, out in West Texas, and we were getting in late. And so they said, okay, we'll just leave the key for you at the office. Okay. So we get there and the office is locked. I'm like, oh my gosh. And we realize our keys are taped to the front door of the office of the motel where we were staying. It's like, well, that's pretty secure.
yeah, that's awesome. Yeah,
And
they're not.
then you look around, you're like, who's going to do something to me? There's nobody here.
No, there's nobody there. And then even if someone did do something like take the keys and leave, like you're pretty easy to find. There's only so many roads. It's like it's kind of crazy. Um,
So I have to do a plug for West Texas. Like I said, born and raised here. I've spent very little time out that direction, but with all of the COVID travel restrictions, I love to travel. And David and I, my husband and I, were getting kind of stir crazy. And so it's like, okay, we got to find something to do. So in March, we actually drove to Big Bend National Park. I had never been before,
wow.
way out in West Texas, and it is stunning, absolutely
Really?
incredible. And I am kind of an amateur photographer, and so we went with some friends and did a class on astrophotography. So I got a chance to take pictures of the Milky Way, which was incredibly cool.
Oh, that's
So,
cool. Yeah, because out there, I mean, you can see everything.
oh
I
my
mean,
gosh, it's one of the top like dark sky locations in the United States,
there's
and so
no
it's
light
a great
pollution.
place for star watching.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's really incredible. I was in White Sands, out near White Sands, New Mexico, and that was like my first experience with that type of terrain and climate and all that. Because I had family in Albuquerque, and we would, you know, took a little trip out west to go see them. And then I was like, hey, I've got a weekend with nothing to do. I'm going to head down to the caverns. And so I traversed Lincoln National Forest and went out near White Sands. And I was like, this is amazing out here. And the next time I came back, I came through Texas to get out there. And it's just the sky is amazing at night. It's so pretty. Everyone is so nice. The food was amazing. I just really kind of underestimated that area of the country. And It's awesome.
Yeah, it's well, like I said, born and raised in the state, and I had never been out there, but it was. Now I hear it's hot as blazes in the summer. So
Yeah,
spring, fall, winter probably great, but summer's probably a little brutal. But yeah,
absolutely.
hiking was amazing, and all the rock formations were really cool. It was a good trip.
Wow. So you guys went out there for like vacation and not work, huh?
Yeah, yeah. So we took 2 days driving out and kind of hit all the little town squares on the way and spent 4 or 5 days there and then a couple days driving back. So it was kind of
Wow.
a neat chance to see places that I had never seen before. So
That's pretty cool. I mean, and that's one of the benefits of travel, period, right? Even if it's for work. And you've traveled quite a bit for work, right? I mean, so what exactly? So let me back up just a little bit. Like, tell me a little bit about the manufacturing game and what that's all about.
yeah, so the manufacturing game is an actual physical board game. So people are always kind of surprised when we're at conferences. We have it set up, and people say, "Oh, this is interesting. So what do you do?" And I say, "Well, this is what I do." It was created by some folks in DuPont. One of them happened to be my father, which is how I got into it. And they had done a benchmark study in the 80s. They took all the information and put it into a system dynamics computer model, thinking that that would help them to kind of share the lessons. And that was very boring and nobody cared. And they wrote white papers and nobody cared. And they did presentations and nobody cared. And so one of the things that they had done in learning about system dynamics, where you're looking at how an entire system works and looking at feedback loops, they had played something called the beer game. And it's not nearly as interesting as it sounds. There's no actual beer drinking involved, but
Ah,
it's basically a distribution system, supply chain system. And so you have the bar that's selling beer, and then you go back to the wholesaler and all the way back down to the brewery. And it just shows that the impact that systems have and the impact that delays in a system have. And so if you have suddenly, one more guy shows up at the bar to drink a beer, it has this ripple effect all the way through the system. So they had played this game as a way of learning about sort of system dynamics theory. And then they had created this very complicated system dynamics model that looks like a bowl of spaghetti that covers an entire wall. And they said, maybe the answer is, instead of showing people the detailed data or the model, maybe we ought to create a board game and
mm,
let people experience it. So instead of having them just listen to it, let them participate in it. And by having that experience, maybe they'll learn some of the same things that we learned by going on the benchmark and talking to people and then going through the whole process of doing the model. So that's how it got created. It was used in DuPont for several years. And then my dad took an early retirement package. And part of his package was actually to be able to take that technology with him when he left.
perfect.
And so started offering it outside of DuPont in 95, I think.
Mm,
And we've been doing it ever since with various modifications and variations as we go along. But the idea is, my dad had really interesting experience. He spent 27 years at DuPont. He's a PhD chemical engineer. He
wow.
had been in every role. So he had been in maintenance, he had been in operations, he had been in research, he had been in HR. And so he had kind of this holistic view of what was going on. And part of what he discovered over his career is that a lot of what was missing wasn't really that we didn't know what the issues were or we didn't have the technical skills to solve them. It
Mm,
was more of missing this kind of organizational want to, for lack of a better word. It's we know what to do, we've got the tools we need, we're just not very good at doing those things consistently. And so it
mm,
was more sort of the human side of reliability. And so that's a lot of what the game deals with, the workshop, is how do you get people to work as an organization to do the best that they can do every day. And again, it's as an organization. So it's not that an individual isn't doing the best that they can do, but it's as an organization.
mm.
Sometimes we get in our own way and we don't give people the opportunity to do the best job that they know how to do.
Yeah, because the game actually, because it's multiplayer, right? It shows the relationships between all of those players and variables. I thought it was brilliant when I saw it. I thought, one, this is cool. It makes it interesting.
Yeah.
Uh, I mean, if I were to walk into, and I think not my time meeting you wasn't too far away from my experience at headquarters in the Coast Guard. So I was still a little shell shocked from the DC like closed door world. And when I met you guys at the SMRP conference, I thought, this is cool. Like this would have been awesome to have set up in one of our conference rooms to learn about something that we could have done to improve ourselves. It would have made it interesting. We would have been engaged. We're all super competitive. So that would have been like, I mean, yeah. Hey, pops. Yeah, my pops just popped in. He said he needs to check it out. You would love this thing. It is amazing, and it's really cool because it really does show how like a board game should, like not only those variables and how they relate to each other, but the cascading effects of decisions. And can you
Yes.
talk a little bit about that? Because I think that's a super
Yeah.
important part of it.
So one of the things we do, that the board has three parts. We've got an operations area, maintenance area, and then what we call business services. So they handle the spare parts and deal with customers and all that kind of stuff. And one of our rules is that you have to sit in a job that's not your normal position. So an operator has to be a mechanic or work in the storeroom and vice versa. And it's really interesting to see, once they kind of have to walk a mile in somebody else's shoes, the different perspective that they have. And a lot of times we get comments along the lines of, I'm a mechanic and I know what operators do in general, but sometimes they would do stuff that just seems stupid to me. And now that I've done it from their side, even though it's just a board game and it's make believe, I understand the pressures that they're under. And I understand that they're not making a stupid decision. They just have pressures on them that I didn't understand. Or, that somebody from the storeroom that says, the mechanics have a fit when we reduce our stock level. And I never understood that until I played this game on the maintenance side. And now I realize how that doesn't just screw up that day, that screws up a month worth of things that you had planned. And so having that kind of knock-on effect, and it really gives people a chance to see that. And then that's a lot of what we see coming out of it is more cooperation. And I saw somebody's asking if we have an app. We don't. And obviously with COVID, it's something that we've thought long and hard about. We thought about it before, but it's something that kind of came to the forefront with COVID. And part of the reason we don't is that most of the value that comes out of this game is the human interaction, the kind of face-to-face, how do we make this work together? And I mentioned the beer game. They have come up with an electronic version of that. I sat through a big presentation that MIT put on about how to use it and how to facilitate it. And at the end, they were asking the professor, John Sturman, so do you see, even after COVID, are you going to stick with this version and not do the hands-on version anymore? He said, oh God, no. He said the in-person hands-on version is so much better. This is just a bridge to get us through the COVID period. So, there's maybe someday I'm going to feel differently about it, but for right now, there's something about that in-person working together, the side conversations and all those sorts of things that you typically don't have in a virtual event, or it's not as easy to do in a virtual event, that add a tremendous amount of value.
Yeah, and Jim Anderson, who asked that question, he was in the Coast Guard with me. He's still in the Coast Guard, and great thinker, real teamwork guy. So he really appreciates that. I know his opportunity to weigh in is a little bit limited in the chat, but his dig it carries a lot of weight when he says that, because he really means like, okay, I understand exactly why you do that, because he's definitely a team player. And let's see, Pops weighed in here and said, oh no, that was probably Hank. Hank, if that's you, give me a sign in the chat. For some reason, anytime Hank weighs in, it shows up as LinkedIn user. Hank. So, yeah, we have a little game we play on ships where the engineers and the operations department are kind of like, we're the two that make the whole thing move and everything happen, but we're also at odds with each other a bit. So it's kind of a good little joke there.
It's funny you mentioned the government work, and well, as you know, my husband has a business that does inspections of boats and barges, and so he has several retired coasties that work for him.
Yep.
So I get to hear a lot about kind of their perspective on things. But we did something several years ago where I think it was the NSA maybe that talked to us, and they said, we're thinking about, from a intelligence community perspective, having some sort of a game would be a great thing for us to work on, sort of interagency type stuff. And so they said, we want you to come out and just run the manufacturing game, just so that we can see how a game works. And obviously it has nothing to do with what we do, but that way people can just see how this could be something maybe we should develop. So we went out and ran the game for them. And, it was interesting because I was the only person in the room who had no clearance. And every now and then they start to talk and they look at me and they're like, we'll talk about this later.
Yeah.
Okay. But one of the things that I found fascinating is after we just played the game the regular way and kind of said, pretend you're in a manufacturing environment. And afterwards, when we did the debrief, we said, okay, let's talk about kind of some of the elements of the game and how this would work for something for the intelligence community. And they started talking about the game, and they're saying this actually fits with what we do. That for us, operations is getting the intelligence, and then with maintenance, we have kind of ongoing plan maintenance we do to protect our sources and our assets. But sometimes that breaks and we have to do breakdown maintenance. And it was just incredible to me how they were able to make these abstract connections. And I think it's because in the game that this idea of defect elimination is kind of fundamental, right? It's not just in manufacturing, it's in life. And that concept, if you kind of get at the heart of it, it applies to most situations.
Yeah. And I think, you're spot on, and the military intelligence community and other operations sides are pretty heavily involved in war gaming, that kind of stuff. We actually do that with model-based systems engineering, where we model certain weapon system capabilities and operational environments, and then we run simulations to see what survives and what doesn't, and all this long gaming. But we don't model the people side of that. We're doing interactions between events and systems, right? Not necessarily the people. I think the people side of it is really important. And I'm going to put you a little on the spot. And so for anyone who hasn't actually seen, there you go, Jim. Doesn't seem abstract. Yeah, we all deliver a product, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And that was Hank, by the way. I did get confirmation of that right here. So we're gonna have to start calling Hank the LinkedIn user instead of Hank the Tank. So when we think about defects, particularly in the maintenance reliability world, right, realm of thinking, or in lifecycle management for physical assets, we're always thinking about the thing, right? Like, and I've really been kind of out on the fringes a little bit with some of my thinking about what segment of a system is actually physical but living, right? Like the human interface and how much weight we should consider in that. Because, like, say, for example, when we're designing like a ship or a weapon system or whatever, we do a failure mode effect and criticality analysis on all the equipment, right? All the critical equipment. But what are we doing to analyze the users? Well, we have certain human performance type assessments, but we don't talk too much about the fundamentals that feed that unless you're the specific analyst that's doing the work. So I think the whole concept of like defect elimination when you design anything should extend more into the user than it traditionally has. And human factors engineers do a good part of that. And the human-centered design piece tries to pick up on that. But for those that don't work in any of those worlds, but need like a really fundamental understanding of the human element in defect elimination, what would you like? How do you explain that? Because I can't do it very well.
Actually, you've done a fantastic job with it. I refer to it as the soft, squishy side of reliability. And I think that's where so many of the good efforts kind of fall down is that there are people in there, and you have to consider what people are going to do. And I can't tell you the number of pieces of equipment that I've seen that are designed where it's like, wow, it's beautiful and it works fantastic, unless you have to operate it or maintain it. And then it's terrible. You'd have to be 15 feet tall and a quarter-inch thin and able to bend in half. I mean, it's just there's no easy way to maintain that equipment. And so I think sometimes in the science of getting the engineering right, sometimes we forget that we have to include this human element. And I'm glad to see that making a big splash in the space these days, that I think a lot more people are thinking about that.
Yeah.
And thinking about, how do you get make it easy for people to do the right thing. And I think that's an important part. But the other piece is getting participation and buy-in. That my husband worked offshore for years, and he said one of the least motivating moments he had was he was kind of new on the site and went up to his supervisor and said, "Hey, boss, I think," and the guy stopped him right there and he said, "We don't pay you to think. You're hired from the neck to the deck. So, just get on it." And he said at that point, he shut down and said, I had all kinds of things that I saw that I knew weren't right, but I wasn't going to say anything because I had been told that I was a pair of hands and nothing more. And so I think that's a really important part of any type of improvement process. And again, I'm glad to see it getting a lot more press these days, is you've got to get people involved. And, when I start talking about this, a lot of times I'll get the question of, well, you can't just let people do whatever, because then it'll be all out of control. And it's like, we trust these guys to run the equipment at night when all the engineers go home. We trust them to run it on the weekends when none of the engineers are there. We trust them to run it on the holidays. Why is it that we think they can't make improvements? And you certainly need management of change and those sorts of things in place, which we have. But the idea that only engineers should be making changes and only engineers should be making improvements, I think is just very wrong. Yeah. And again, it's gonna turn people off. And so you're gonna take the most important people in your organization, the people who are closest to the equipment. What they do matters more than anybody else because they have that direct impact on the equipment. If you're telling them, turn your brain off and just do what I tell you, you're going to get what you're going to get.
Yeah.
And not be terribly happy with the results.
Yeah. We actually have a pretty good little short C story. I promise, for everyone that's going, oh, don't do it, dude. Right? So we had a breaker installation. Breakers on ships for the main buses are massive. You look 300 pounds. They're very big. Jim, calm down. I know I'm getting you all excited talking about shipboard breakers, but these main bus breakers are really big and they're very complex. Like, it's a big breaker, but it's not like a breaker in your panel at home. It's got a tremendous amount of integration with this, with the switchboard, and it's not like 3 wires in and out. This is very complex, and we had a contractor come on board to swap out all of our main breakers, put these newer ones in, do the install, and then leave. And of course, we have to do that at night so we could take ship's power down. And, we're worried about frozen food going bad and all that stuff. So our time period is very restricted. So these guys come on and we shake hands and we talk and everyone's happy and they get to work. And I go down there an hour later and they're all just standing there, like scratching their heads, looking at the schematics. And then I go down another hour later and they're still down there, still scratching heads. And, I said, what's going on, guys? And they're like, oh, we're having a hard time because this isn't what we expected to see. When they opened up the switchboard and took the old breaker out, they were like, whoa, what's going on in here? And I said, just curious. So what do you guys all do? And the guy's like, well, I'm the lead. It's our company, but we're all electrical engineers. And I said, oh, all of you are engineers? And they said, yeah. I said, where's the master electrician? And they kind of looked at each other and I was like, so engineers don't normally wire up switchboards. We're not the people going in there to repair the switchboard when it breaks, or to swap out components. You're really good at engineering the system, but they're not normally on the wrench or meter end of the job. And we had to go get one of the master chiefs from the assist, which is like a pit crew for us, expert electrician, to come down, this old master chief, and he sat down for an hour and said, all right, I don't know what the hell I'm looking at either, but give me a minute. And he figured it out, right? Because he had experience working in those systems and everything. So you're absolutely correct. I mean, there is a line where, and I'm not going to say every, but most technicians and engineers have a line of delineation between them at some point. And understanding where that line of capability is important, because it doesn't just work in one way, right? Like, it's just not like engineer bad, technician great. I mean, the technician's only so capable as well. I don't want, even though my damage controlman could weld the hull together, I didn't want them designing a ship. They're not naval architects, right?
Yeah.
So.
Exactly. And I think that's part of what we try to do with the manufacturing game.
He was an electrician.
Kind of go through that. Everybody has a role to play, and it's impossible for any one person to be able to do it all. There's too much to know, too much to get your hands around the whole thing. And so the key is figuring out, how do we work together as an organization where I have my strengths and I do my piece, and you've got your strengths and you do your piece. And I think, one of the things that's happened in heavy industry over time, and I see it reversing, which is wonderful, is this over-reliance on engineering, that's going to solve all the problems. We can just engineer all the problems out. And that's true with some things. That's just not true with other things. And I think that's where a lot of the reliability issues that we see today really come from that. You got to do more than just engineering work. You've got to work on, how are we operating? How are we maintaining equipment? How are we storing our spare parts and those sorts of things? That's the part that's been ignored for quite a while as we came up with all these great engineering solutions. And I think now it's coming back to, okay, let's engineer it right. Let's have a good design, but let's also operate it and maintain it properly as well.
Yeah, you got to do both.
Yep.
And I won't bore you with a long conversation about supportability, but that's essentially what the military does is they invest in something called product support, which is, well, we've designed a ship and we've delivered it. Now we have to take care of it. And it goes everything from the maintenance to the supplies to the training to, the special equipment and contracts and everything. So tools, everything. It's all wrapped in the product support world, which is traditionally executed as integrated logistics. So, hey, Ahmed, hello. Ahmed, he's able to pry himself out of the maintenance community for a moment. Guys, look around, see that we were live. It's great to see you, Ahmed. Make sure you jump in there and ask Michelle a really difficult question.
Oh.
I'm kidding.
Thanks.
Yeah, and Jim, you brought up a good point here. Professional development of technicians into engineers into innovation. Yeah, managing the human growth without stifling talent. Yeah, it's really. There's a lot to it, right? Hey, so guess where I've seen this really kind of prevalent lately is in software tailoring, right? When they design software for some type of engineering application or some type of maintenance and reliability even application, they'll develop the software without considering the impact to the processes and the people on the backside, right? So the user, I do a bit of agile facilitation, like agile product development, and the user's supposed to be at the center of those sprints, right? You're supposed to have a representative there to demonstrate that the software is meeting the need of the intended user. And that product manager is supposed to be responsible for that. But what we find is like a lot of times the software is maybe developed to a certain point that way, and they've done a decent job with the software. But there's a transition from developed software to implementation in an organization. That's the gap that oftentimes gets dropped. So you've got like a great software product or whatever, and now you have to get it implemented into your organization. So you can't just buy software and fix your problems. That's like a simplified way of saying, yes, but it's not just like also get a guy training or a gal training on how to use the software. That's not it either. How is that software going to impact all of your processes, your analysis, the workload, data capture, collection and management, all that stuff? It gets big really fast, right? So I think one of the cool things about the world you work in with defect elimination is that it's everywhere, right? Like there's defects in everything. Yeah. So do you find that, all right, let's say I'm a manager in manufacturing, right? And I'm responsible for this plant and I've got all this equipment I'm trying to maintain. And of course, I'm overwhelmed and I'm understaffed and I'm under-resourced. What can if I engage in active defect elimination through a method like, the manufacturing game, like what does that experience look like for me? How does that work for me as a manager in that situation?
So actually, I've been having a LinkedIn chat with somebody about some of these issues as well. And I think, again, we've been pretty good about doing sort of top-down big defect elimination when we have big problems and we need big resources to solve it. But then it is overwhelming because you have all these issues and you have a handful of people that are trying to take care of them. And part of what we promote with the manufacturing game is tap into that big chunk of the workforce that you have, those people that see the equipment every day. You'll talk to some of the engineers and say, well, let me go run a report to see where the problems are. Or I can go talk to an operator and in 5 minutes I can know where the problems are because they see them every day and they have to deal with them. And so kind of putting in a two-tiered approach. So doing the top down and still doing the more rigorous processes that way, but adding to it this bottom-up approach to say, look, everybody that works here, what's something that drives you nuts that we can fix fairly easily, that you can fix fairly easily, not we, that you with a group of people can fix easily. And let's make it happen. Let's come up with a way that you can get those things done. Because it's kind of like, if you're trying to clean out your garage and it's just filled with junk, you can't figure out where the big pieces go until you get some of the little stuff out of the way. And so kind of adding this bottom up type defect elimination to the bigger top down traditional stuff that people think about when they think about defect elimination is an important part of the process. That when you just get rid of those just nagging little issues that take up people's time and as much as anything distract them, that the steam leak over here, and it's annoying. It doesn't really cause a problem in the process, but God, it's annoying that it's here every single day. And giving people a chance to make some of those things go away, and it's just incredible. And it's very non-linear as well. So that's the thing, bugs breed, and that's good and that's bad. So when you get one extra bug in your system, that's a chance to put a whole lot more bugs in, because you're having to operate around it. You're having to do maintenance work. You're having to bring out spare parts to deal with it. Those are all opportunities to bring in more defects. But the upside is when you get rid of one bug, it's not just getting rid of one, it's getting rid of all the ones that it would have created kind of beyond that. And so you get this big sort of non-linear improvement just by taking on these really small projects. And I think most organizations that get kind of that overwhelmed feeling, they're like, God, there's just so many things out there. So I've got to work on the big ones. I can't waste my time on the small ones. But if you get everybody working on the small ones, it provides the time and attention and the money to then do a better job on the big ones.
Yeah, and it kind of gets them hungry for, they see the fruits of their work quickly, and they see the benefit of the activity. It's like, it's worth undertaking this effort, and they start to see the potential everywhere around them,
Absolutely. And it's not just good for the company, it's good for them. That George Mahoney at Merck says it makes for a better day at work. And there's nothing quite as motivating as to just have a better day at work. I go in and I get to do something that I enjoy doing, that's interesting. I'm not beating my head against the wall yet again. And that spurs more and more and more defect elimination.
See, I was real big on that with cleanliness in the engine room, because as a machinery technician, basically a diesel mechanic, and a machinery technician, we would, you're living in the engine room all day, and, your dirt comes in through ventilation, and, it's just naturally brought in through traffic and other types of activities like that. But, we were always thinking about what's getting in the engines, in the equipment. Yeah. And so it wasn't just, sometimes my guys wouldn't understand why I was so adamant about like making sure everything was clean. I'm like, look, we have to keep this place clean. They're like, gosh, it's an engine room, dude. Like, if it's a little dirty, I'm like, you don't understand. Like, A, it's a point of pride. Yep. But B, this is where we live. So that's one huge piece of it. We spend way too much time down here. And the third thing is, it's going to make the equipment healthier. Like, and then of course, every machine's got a soul. And I think if you take care of the machine, it knows it can sense it,
That is very true.
Yeah. Scientific, man, you can prove it.
It also makes defects easier to see. And so when you're in a messy environment, if you've got an oil leak, how do you know? And is that current? Was that from a month ago? Is it, so having that, starting with that sort of clean environment, it helps you notice when things are out of whack, which actually reminds me of, I think it was an SMRP conference many moons ago, but they had Jeff Gordon, the NASCAR driver, come in and talk. And so he was talking about sort of those systems, those early warning systems when something's not quite right. And so he says, I'm driving around this track going really fast, and I've got all these gauges that I have to look at. And so to look at them as I'm driving fast, I've got just a split second to look down. And he said, we're trying to figure out how could I do a better job of letting my pit crew know what was going on with my equipment, but I don't have time to stare at these gauges. And so we tried the red, green, and those sorts of things. And he said, finally, they figured out, they took all the gauges and cocked them so that if it was running properly, there was a straight line of all the needles.
There you go.
And then he said, at a quick glance, you notice a straight line versus a break, whereas you don't necessarily notice exactly what the reading is. But he said that way I could very quickly tell that this is not quite right.
Yeah,
and then I could give that information. But that's similar to the cleanliness thing, right? If my engine room is always clean, then I notice when something's not operating properly.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely correct. No, I think that's great, that the example from the race car, because when you get into the period of observation is so brief. It's so brief, and that is a real thing. Like we've seen in even like I have a graphics design guy I work with, and when we were doing one of our logos, he sat me down and said, "Hey, let me show you this thing I did." And he took two triangles that were of equal size and put them one right over the other, but staggered. And it was amazing how weird it looked, and they were identical. So he bent one and then put them next to each other, and it finally looked right. They looked symmetrical. But it's that trick of the eye. Like you can
Yeah.
immediately pick up on it's something's not right, something's wrong in a split second. If all you have is the split second, right? Like
Yeah.
you're going to look for a second. That's all you've got time for. It's pretty wild stuff. Let's see. What do we like? Oh yeah. So this is a joke. So I brought up cleanliness in the engine room. Okay. And so what ends up happening is guys like Pops would go to the chief engineer, Hank, and say, I need more money for lights under my deck plates. And I don't need a time compliant technical order or an engineering change to do it. And that's the smiley faces. I don't have the money, and yes, you do. All right, Ahmed, let's see what you got here. All right. So Michelle and I are going to warm the brains up for a second. It doesn't take her nearly as much time as it does me. Let's see. While conducting a lube survey, I always chat and interact more with the operators and technicians and the management to get the detailed information. Yep. As long as they give me the yeah. Hey, and so Ahmed, isn't it crazy how sometimes they pick up on things that no one else does? Like they'll tell you, oh, it's always like this, and now it's like this. And then if you ask the design engineer, it was supposed to be something entirely different from both of those things, but they never observe it because their job is to design it. And then the rest of his comment was always giving the tip. Yeah, the operators are excited to interact. Yes, this policy has been very successful. Yeah, absolutely. And it goes in line with, the common, leadership by walking around kind of approach. And the engagement between management and the technicians to the betterment of information and communication, all about safety. Yeah, that's the easy trigger to pull every time you need the money. So that's what my guys used to tell me when I get their order for all the Snap-on tools. I'd say, guys, what are we doing? Like, this is like I just bought you guys tools. They're like, well, sir, they're the best. And I'm like, well, then why are you buying more? Like, did you break them or did you lose them? If you didn't break them because they're just that good, then you lost them, and that's on you. And I'm not buying you more tools to lose. So, yeah. So okay. So, all right. This is where I think the real money makers are. Right. So, I don't work in defect elimination for a living. Most people on here have, just like me, they have a certain measure of experience with this stuff.
Right.
What do we usually miss? Like, what do you find the common, like, we either don't see it, we step right around it, in the process of trying to correct and identify and correct defects. What do you see as kind of like the common pitfalls for people managing these systems?
So one of the things that's interesting, and so let me back up a little bit. Part of what we talk about and what they learned in DuPont from the benchmark was this idea of these stable domains, operating domains. So reactive, planned, and improved precision, right? And getting better with it. And completely blanked on what I was talking about.
It's all right. I was asking you about, like, what do we usually miss?
Yeah. So part of it is working on small stuff. Oh, that's what it was. So we think about these defects as being these horrible things that everybody hates. And the fact of the matter is that sometimes we get used to them and they're almost like our little pets. We just know that when you're operating this machine, you've got to knock twice and jiggle for it to work or whatever it is. And same thing that we saw with the stable domains, where people tend to think, well, the reactive mode is bad. And the answer is it's not bad. It keeps you in business, right? If you don't react when things break, you go out of business. And so it's not sort of there's evil and good. It's there's good enough and there's better. And so I think that's a lot of the stuff with the bugs is we kind of stop noticing them. In fact, I'm sitting in a chair right now that every now and then the cylinder goes out and I shrink down to the floor. And I've just gotten used to it. I stand up and I pump it back up, and it's good enough until the next time it happens. And you live with that until all of a sudden, I fall on the floor and it becomes a real problem. But I think that's true with a lot of defects. That there's so many of these small ones that we just say, well, that's just how it is, and it's no big deal, and let it go. But when you have tens of thousands of those, and then you kind of get that Swiss cheese model, so when it all goes wrong at the exact same time, that's when you wind up with a big reliability incident, or heaven forbid, a big safety incident. I would say that's probably the number one thing, is just not giving enough credit to the small nagging issues, and thinking that because they don't individually have a big impact, that cumulatively they don't.
Oh, that's great. I love that. Yeah, there's a great book. I think it's Darren Hardy that wrote it, which is like more like professional development, like kind of guy. He's not necessarily in the engineering space, but he wrote a good book called The Compound Effect. And it's about like the compounding effect of our decisions. And I immediately related that to running a department. When I read that book, I said, man, like all of our compounding decisions, the things like you said we accept as our part of our environment, our day-to-day routines, that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
that can really bite us, and we don't tend to sometimes think about that. That's a really good point, Michelle. I'm glad to hear that's what it is, because that doesn't
What's
make
the
me feel.
author's name? That sounds interesting.
His name's Darren Hardy. There's actually a really good short story in there. He gives a couple of anecdotal kind of points in the beginning, and one of them is that he had this friend who was, the guy was just sinking further and further into poor performance and anxiety and having problems with all this stuff in his life. And he goes to Darren, the author, and says, "Hey, I don't know why this is happening to me." And so he goes, "Well, why don't you write down everything you're doing? Like everything. I want to know all about your day. Do it for a whole week. Write down everything." And so the guy's like, it seems kind of annoying, but whatever. So they like, we're going to find what it is. So they do this, they look at his stuff. Come to find out, he's like just overwhelmed with news. Like he wakes up because he was on Wall Street. So he was trying to watch the ticker all the time. So he'd wake up and the first thing he'd do is turn the TV on, and the news was on. And he would go brush his teeth while he's watching the news, and he's eating breakfast while he's watching the news. Then he takes the train into the city, reading the newspaper. He gets to work, he puts the news on in his office. And there's like 18 hours a day of just being inundated with everything's failing, everything's broken, everything's bad, right? Because that's mass news, right? And so it was starting to take a toll on him. And it shifted his perception on things to being very pessimistic. And that started to negatively impact his performance, and it started to impact his dieting. And then it led to sleep deprivation issues. And this whole guy's life is like substandard because he watches the news too much. And I thought, oh, that's true. Like, if you,
I believe it. I mean, the past 18 months, there've been a couple of times where it's like, I'm taking a social media break. I need to be off of this for a couple of weeks, because it's all consuming.
Yes.
Very challenging.
Yeah, I thought that was a really good part of that book. It was just kind of very insightful in that regard. But yeah, anyways, pretty cool to read if you're looking for something quick. And yeah, it kind of makes you look at what you do. Like I always feel guilty when I read something like that, because later on I'm like, damn, I kind of suck at some of these things. I'm like looking around going, maybe I shouldn't be working so late. Maybe I should regulate my morning a little bit better. Maybe I should do this, do that. Oh, look at these compounding mistakes I'm making. So we were talking before we went live today. You guys are planning, just like I am, to go out to SMRP this year, right?
Yes. Yeah, we're excited about that. We'll, as of today, we'll be running a workshop there the first day of the conference, and then I've got a presentation I'm doing as well. So like I said, I work on the soft, squishy side of reliability. My presentation is about storytelling. Go figure. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's perfect. Like that's what they need there, because I'm doing a workshop with Bob Latino, right? And Bob and I are going to do this. Like you figure out what's wrong through RCA, and then we come up with solutions, and then, oh no, we're going to have to support this solution. So let's build the case around it. Now let's go get sponsorship. But we're pretty we're not typical, but we're close enough to typical, right? And we got like really cool people like you going up there and doing that kind of stuff. And then we got really cool people like Tom Moriarty and
Mhm.
Hank, which I've been looking at the schedules to make sure we're not delivering at the same time because I got to go throw like popcorn and stuff at Hank. And I just don't want to miss out on what everyone's doing. So are you presenting, is your workshop on Monday or Tuesday?
My workshop's on Monday, and I
Okay.
think my presentation's on Wednesday.
Okay. Gotcha. And
You
I think
know,
we're on first thing Thursday morning. So it's
but what you were talking about, it fits with, I think, what I'm gonna talk about it more specifically. But that whole sort of, we've got the solution, and now we have to go sell it. That's
mhm.
where storytelling comes in. And whether you're selling it to the sponsors, we need money for this, or you're selling it to the people that have to do the work to say, this is why you should do it. And that's what I'm going to be talking about is that kind of, uh, we think from an engineering perspective, if I just put up all the numbers and I just show that if you do this, you're going to spend this and you're going to save that, that's what convinces people. And the answer is that's not true at all. And there's a multi-billion-dollar advertising industry that proves that that's not the case, right? How many times do
Right.
you watch TV and they just put up a thing with all text of just the facts about whatever the product is? Never. Right. And it's about the stories. It's about getting people to not just understand things intellectually, but to understand them emotionally as well, and to make that commitment. And then you've got to consider your audience. So if you're trying to get the money, then that's you're going to approach it differently than if you're trying to get people to actually work on it with you. And I think with Bob's stuff with root cause failure analysis that he's been doing for years, one of the biggest complaints is we come up with we know what the problems are, we know what the answers are, and nobody does anything about it. And so
Exactly.
it doesn't matter, right? Unless somebody takes action, it just doesn't matter.
So do you start every story with, so there I was?
No, but I might. That's a good one. So
Yeah,
there.
I'm gonna have to go to this workshop so I can get that part right because when you're learning how to drive ships and stuff, the captains always do this debrief afterwards. And the captain I learned under, he would make us say, "So there I was," and everyone would go, "No shit," like we all laugh. And I gotta say it quiet because I don't want to get censored here on all these platforms, but we would all laugh. It was actually kind of like a little bit of an icebreaker for us.
I
So
love that though, because it does put you in the storytelling mode, because it's very easy. And I won't knock anybody at any of these conferences, but sometimes you sit in them and it's like what you're saying is wonderful. The way you're saying it is just brutal. And it's hard to listen to. I'm having to make myself pay attention to this. And it reminds me of in school when I was a kid, history, I just absolutely hated it because the teachers I had, it was all about memorizing dates and names, and that was horrible. And then I got to college and I had two of the best history professors on the face of the earth, in my opinion, but they told stories. And it was like, wow, this is fascinating
yeah.
when it's told in the form of a story, as opposed to just here a list of dates and locations and names that you have to memorize. And so I think the same thing is true. Again, we want to just say, well, here's this 20-step program that I put in place at my site, and then here are the results that we got. And it's like, no, tell me the stories. What was hard about it? Who did you have to convince? How did you convince them? Those are the things that are going to make it memorable for me and are going to make me connect to it, as opposed to just, here's something that, well, essentially, here's a presentation you could have just read for yourself. You don't need me here to read the slides to you.
Like, oh, Hank's dropping them on me. I'll let you take care of that, Hank. Well, I'm gonna do the polite thing. I'm gonna defer to the more senior sailors in the conversation. But although Michelle, theirs are probably more in line with what your husband would tell their stories. He was working. Did he work offshore platforms his whole career?
No, he started there and then started working with a tug and barge company, and
Gotcha.
then started his own company about 15 years ago doing the inspection work. But
God bless.
he's from Louisiana and did a lot of work offshore and with mariners. So he's got a lot of stories, many inappropriate for sharing on social media platforms.
We're gonna have a private room one night where
Yes.
Michelle and I will bring all these random people with their crazy stories in, and we'll just be like, no way. What happened next? We'll just let you guys have at it with all the craziness. Yeah, we relish that for leadership training in this service. It was one of the things that I loved about. I attended a couple semesters at the Naval War College. They have like a series that they do off-site. So if you're in DC, you can go to these classes at the Naval Academy versus having to go up to Rhode Island, where the naval, where their school is at for these areas of studies. And they would always bring in these amazing professors because these guys were like, they knew the history behind warfare. And you're learning about warfare from people that are telling you about what happened at war. And it was like watching a 4-hour movie every night. It was enthralling. But, of course, then they hand you like 17 books that are written by, war researchers, and you're like falling asleep on page 3. But it was pretty impressive stuff. The power of a story to help embed. To me, it has a lot to do with not just like the transfer of knowledge, but it has a lot to do with the retention. And you remember it better. You tend to hold on to a story much better than you do like a brief, right? So I'm actually pretty psyched that you brought that up, because I think one of the things that people that do analytical type work fail at the most is not the analytics, right? They do really well with the analysis, but when they're done with it, packaging and pushing it. And when I teach project management, one of the things we tell them is that there's a life cycle to a message, right? You've got data, and you grab data, and then you analyze it so you can turn it into information. And then information helps me make decisions, but I have to report it in a certain way. I can't just hand over a pile of data that doesn't tell me anything, and then I can't hand over a pile of information because even that's not fully assembled. So, the reporting part is so important, and that's where the storytelling is in reporting what you found or what you need, and that's super powerful. That's awesome. I love it. I love it. What else do you have?
It gets people to care, to understand, and I think most importantly to act, because ultimately that's what you want, right? You're really, in general, you're not just informing. You want people to do something about it. And so whether you're, again, you're trying to convince somebody to give you the money, you're trying to convince people to dedicate their time to it, or just like in an SMRP environment, you're wanting to put this knowledge out there because you want people to actually go do it. And I think that's where the storytelling comes in, is that it kind of gets people to take it to action, which is, and that's one of the things that super important to my dad when he started the business. And it's something that I've picked up from him as well. As he said, I've 27 years at DuPont. He said, I've been to all the classes, I've got all the books sitting on the shelf, and there's so much that I know that I don't use. And I don't want to be somebody that adds more to that. I don't want to be one more book that's on somebody's shelf. I want to make sure that what we do is taken to action. And my dad's, the fact that it was a second career for him, he was also pretty adamant about, would go work with somebody and they're like, well, the game's just fun and we want it as entertainment, but we're not actually going to go do this. And he'd be like, then I'm not coming. And I'm like, Dad, I need to check this month.
Yeah, you're like, come on, man.
Wait a second, I don't have retirement money coming in. But he felt so strongly about it, and it's something that's really important to me. And so I've gotten to where I'm the same way, that I'll do a workshop as kind of a demonstration once. Maybe twice if somebody can convince me that we didn't have the right people in the room. But after that, if they're not taking it to action, I'm not coming back.
Yeah.
And I've turned down business because of that. That it's this isn't corporate. I'm not interested in providing corporate entertainment. Somebody else might be, and it would be great for that because it is entertaining. But I want to do something where it makes a difference and that it means something to people, and that they use what they learned to go make a better life for themselves and the other people they work with.
Absolutely, man. Yeah. What a great message, and what a great thing to hang your hat on at the end of the day. Like, you guys get to do something really important and impactful. And you kept mentioning books on shelves, so I was going to ask anyways, if you could reach over your shoulder and grab that red covered book up there. There you go. There it is. For those that don't know, please explain the book.
So first of all, I had to put my initials on it and cut the corner because my husband kept giving my copy to other people to read. I'm like, that's mine with like my notes in it and stuff. So don't give it away. But this is something that my dad wrote, and actually in conjunction with my brother who worked with us for a while, both named Winston, makes it very confusing. But basically, one of the things that helped my dad when he first started with the manufacturing game was reading a book called The Goal by Goldratt. And so it's a story form, but there's a lesson in there. And so when my dad said, I really need to write a book about defect elimination, he said, but I don't want to write just a textbook. I want to do it story form. And so that's what Don't Just Fix It, Improve It is it's the story of a plant manager who's, kind of everything is going along fine, but things aren't quite like he would like them to be. And then someone gets hurt because a piece of equipment fails. And that kind of starts his journey towards improving reliability. And again, for him, it was very personal. And I think this fit with my dad because he had a very similar experience early on in his career at DuPont where a piece of equipment failed and people were hurt. And that was his motivation for the rest of his career of, I don't ever want that to happen again. I don't ever want to have that conversation with the family again. And that's something that I think, again, it gets at that it should be personal. You should be passionate about it. And getting people to be passionate and telling the stories is one way to do it. So the book kind of goes through all the trials and tribulations of once you decide that this is what you want to do, how do you make that happen? And it's not an easy road. It's not once you say, oh, defect elimination is it, and then the rainbow comes out and all the clouds clear away. It's a tough road. And it takes a lot of work, and it takes a lot of people working together to be able to make it happen. But if you have that passion for it, then that keeps you going even when the times are tough.
I think that there's some pretty innovative ways you can get over that stuff too, right? Like everyone's going to automatically default to and I'm not going to feel sorry saying this, but they're going to pick excuses, right? Or they'll be a little lazy, like, oh, we don't have time for that. We're too busy.
Yeah.
You know how many times I've had people ask me, how do you get all that stuff done? I don't sleep. It's like, I could just say, I could just go to bed at, 9, 10 o'clock, but the reality is I wouldn't be able to do those things if I did that. Right. So like, if that's what I want to say is I just don't have time, then I'll go to bed earlier and I wouldn't have the time because I'm sleeping, but we would use like safety inspections for stuff like this. And we called them material inspections and, to go out and look at the material condition of the ship with the commanding officer and the rest of the leadership. And but really what it was a way to inspect the spaces and make sure we had a safe, tight ship and everything was going well. Well, when you go to shipyards, right, where we spent a significant amount of time, we would walk these shipyards and there was always that one safety dude who was like, let me see your glasses. Are those the right glasses? Are those steel toes? Let me see that hard hat. It's got an expiration date in it, and you're like, come on, guy, and but that dude was probably finding and knocking out more defects in because if you have someone that's roving like processes like that too, just constantly scanning for process improvements. So take your safety guy because he's already a pain and he's already got this like knack for being like, just, I don't care, I got to do it. And train them how to identify and correct defects. They don't even have to be the one that does it, but they can be the one that helps identify them and track them. I love that because you're going to have to turn around as soon as you see them anyway. So you might as well.
Yeah, exactly.
And so
well, it's one of the things that my dad found really frustrating because, DuPont is, and I haven't been around them for 25 years, but growing up as the child of a DuPont are very, very focused on safety and not just safety at the plant, but safety at home. And that actually, I didn't realize until my dad did a presentation on it, that comes from this history of, they used to make gunpowder. And so they frequently would blow their place up and they had family members working there. And so it would hurt and kill family members. And so it was a very personal thing for the DuPont family to try and improve safety. And that carried into the chemical business. And again, as a child of a DuPont, or you get in like a minor fender bender, somebody rear-ended me. And I'm like, oh my God. So I go home, I tell my parents and I'm like, can I just be punished? I really don't want to have to do the accident investigation. It wasn't my fault. I was rear-ended. Well, did you really have to be there? And was there another route? And it's like, oh, but it's something that my dad brought home because it was so strong at the plant. And then he got really frustrated with not being able to get the same kind of buy-in with defect elimination because it's the same thing, right? It's a slightly different flavor of the same dish. And so while DuPont was really good at the safety side of it, they struggled with the defect elimination side. But you're right, it's very similar, right? It's noticing all those small things and caring enough to do something about them, even though each individual one is very small.
I love it. I love it. And what a great point to kind of make. Like we're like right up against the hour. I lost track of the time completely. But we are, look, I can see the clock ticking. It's 59.
58, 59.
There we go.
There it is.
So, Michelle, this is like a perfect, so you can't get out of here without getting more praise from me. But, there's some people that have weighed in and said some really nice things. Tom Moriarty said, that your family is some of the, tops people in his book. And, carrying forth the legacy is awesome. But, when we have these conversations, I'm very picky about who I want to come on and talk with, because I want it to be people that, let's see, how do I put this? It's not just about an interesting topic, right? The whole show is about people in the industry and the things and the processes, but it's people first. And you're one of those people that really makes this industry what it is. You're so good at what you guys do. We absolutely love running into you at SMRP, and I can't wait to see you again in October. And I'm just blessed that you came on with me today, and I would love to have you back sometime. So thank you so much for taking the time out of your day. People don't know this, but Michelle and I have been we planned this a month ago. Yeah. And we had to move dates around, and then I was sending her the wrong information and screwing things up. So, thank you for your patience with keeping me in line the last week too.
No, yeah, I appreciate the opportunity, and I appreciate all the comments too. I am very proud of what my dad has done and the business that he and my mom built together, and it's really exciting for me to be able to carry it on and to feel like I've got big shoes to fill. And so it was pretty intimidating early on, and hopefully I'm doing a good job and maintaining his level of standards.
You're doing an amazing job, and all of you are. But I'd be terrible if I didn't ask you, how can people get a hold of you? Where can they find out more about you? Where can they get the book? Where can they learn about the game?
So the book is Don't Just Fix It, Improve It, and it's available on Amazon. I'm on LinkedIn. So Michelle, can't remember, I think it's Michelle Ledet Henley, Ledet, on LinkedIn. So definitely connect with me there. That would be awesome. Our website is manufacturinggame.com. So it has more details on the workshop specifically. And then, like you said, I'll be at SMRP in October. So hopefully we'll get a chance to see people face to face.
Yes.
Yeah, maybe not shake hands yet, but at least get to see people, maybe masked, but at least face to face, not across a Zoom screen. So
yeah, and you know what? All that stuff in place, that's fine. I'm still gonna let Bob buy the first round of beers, so we'll be good.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Here to defend himself again. So he's gonna start tuning in more when he realizes that for every time he doesn't, he has to pick up the first round.
Yeah, all the things we commit him to.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Michelle. For those that are interested, come check out eastpartnership.org. We've got all kinds of great stuff going on there. Great new classes coming out. We've got RCM courses launching in October in both English and Spanish with Jesus Safante, so jump on those. And of course, check out the amazing asset management line from Suzanne Greenman, because she is putting out new content regularly. And I'm going to start spamming people with her new course launches because they're just amazing. For those that have never worked with Suzanne, she's
incredible.
She is incredible. So,
and talk about a good storyteller. Ooh.
Yes. And I love her phrases because, she was born and raised in Jamaica. And some of the things she says to me are I'm just dying laughing. She gives me so many great little catchphrases. I love it. You could hire her to write a book on catchphrases. They're awesome. So, all right. Well, thank you so much, Miss Michelle. We will have you back soon. And I am really looking forward to seeing you in October.
Yeah. See you there. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a good one.
Bye, everybody.